Hello and welcome to another episode of Name on the Trophy, the Manchester United podcast and YouTube show hosted by me, Dominic Booth. It's the return of Alex Wylie once again, a stats special with our resident expert. Am I okay calling you an expert, Alex?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
You don't want any higher, grander title then. I was thinking a nickname along the Statman Dave lines, but maybe
No,
we can develop that.
I'm all right with Alex, stats expert for now.
That's absolutely fine. And that's what we'll be doing today, delving further into stats related to particularly United's forward line and the rest of the season. We've done a few of these episodes where we've looked at transfers and players that United should be signing. We'll be looking in-house today, following the loan signing of Wout Weghorst and the impending return of Jadon Sancho to the main topics that we will be discussing, to the main players we'll be discussing. And we speak actually just after Weghorst broke his United deadlock in his third appearance, Alex, a goal against Nottingham Forest in that Carabao Cup first leg victory. Mixed reports, I think, from his first few games. What's your general perception of Weghorst? I know there was a lot of skepticism, if I can say that word, around the signing, but he appears to have settled reasonably well.
Yeah, I think he's settled in fairly well. I think what he gives us is effectively something different. And I feel like any number 9 we brought in would have brought that in. He gives us a focal point. He tends to stick to his position. His primary aim is just to score goals. And that in and of itself gives us something else going on the pitch. So you're thinking like Sebastian Haller at Ajax, Klaas-Jan Huntelaar, all these players that played under Ten Hag in the past. Weghorst is effectively doing that again. You know, he's someone that gives us a focal point, someone to get crosses into, someone that can hold the ball up, and someone who surprisingly presses the opposition quite a lot as well, which I think kind of ticks a lot of boxes that Ten Hag would want from a number 9.
Yeah, he was obviously brought in to add support, or it looks at the moment to replace Antony Martial. Whether Martial could last the whole season as the number 9 was pretty much accepted as a no, given his injury record and his inconsistencies, basically in terms of fitness, form, and pretty much everything about his game is inconsistent. Weghorst seems to me like a more of a consistent performer. He might have a significantly lower ceiling than Martial or somebody like that, but Ten Hag's brought in somebody because he's had a budget to work with, but also because he wants a player where he's getting exactly what he knows he can get from him.
Yeah, I think United fans all agree now that Martial just can't be relied upon anymore. And it's a shame because you see it in glimpses. Martial has the capabilities to be a truly, truly great player, but he's just not consistent enough on the pitch, and he's not consistent enough getting onto the pitch for United or really any top side in the world to rely on. And that's just the harsh truth. I
Did
love
we kid ourselves
Martial.
a little bit with Martial for a long time? A lot of United fans have an idealistic view of him, and they really wasn't going to ever come to fruition. Given last season, he went on loan to Sevilla for the second half of the campaign. I think he scored 1 in 14, 1 in 15. If this wasn't the
Yeah.
player that was going to come back and dominate for Manchester United, really.
No, he was terrible at Sevilla. I think his Sabr score was 73, 74. The average Premier League striker is 78. So at Sevilla, he almost looked like a lower Premier League striker, if that. But I don't think that's reflective of his actual ability. I think if you think about the hot streak he had at the very start of the season, that's sort of like his ceiling, and then the floor was what he was like at Sevilla. Technically, United fans were spot on. Martial is technically a very good striker. His ability when he's dribbling, his ball control, his finishing are all very, very good. But it goes back to what I said before. It's the consistency. And as we've got to know Martial longer and longer at United, it's become more apparent that it's that he's missing. You cannot be an elite player if you're not consistent. Think about Ronaldo. Think about Messi. What do? They play week in, week out. I assume quite often play through pain. And it feels harsh to say, but I don't think Martial pushes himself to that extent. I just can't believe that he's so unlucky that his body's just letting him down in all these different ways all the time. I think it's, like I said, it's harsh to say, but I think it's a mental problem, if I'm honest.
Yeah, you never know what's going on entirely behind the scenes with a player, and it is speculation. We talk about that with Martial, but I think
Yeah.
United fans have that perception that you just said there, Alex, that he could be a bit tougher. The gloves that he never seems to take off no matter what month of the year. And
I don't mind. I wear gloves when I play football. I'm not going to hold
yeah,
him,
well, you're a
drag him over
similar
the
type of
coals for
player
that.
to Martial actually when we play five-a-side. So there's no surprise there. We were on Weghorst before, weren't we? And the numbers that Weghorst brings, known as a pressing monster. I don't know if that's a phrase that's just been bandied about by hopeful United fans on social media, desperate that he will make an impact. But his pressing numbers actually, even from the eye test, he looks like a fantastic presser of the ball.
He works hard for a guy as big as he is. He is surprisingly mobile, and I think when he was at Wolfsburg, you saw that a lot. He wasn't just a big lump. He was someone who he gets about on and off the ball. He's constantly making runs, and off the ball. Last year basically makes a tackle per 90, half an interception per 90, and those don't sound particularly good. But for a striker, that puts him in the 85th percentile for both. So he's not what you expect when you look at him. When you look at him, you think he's there for the knockdowns, he's going to win headers, he's going to be quite slow off the ball, but he isn't that. He actually drops fairly deep. I mean, he's happy coming back. Yeah. He makes 27 passes per 90, which puts him in the 78th percentile for a striker. So this isn't a guy who's getting a few touches and then putting the ball in the back of the net. This is someone who is happy dropping deep. Yes, he's decent in the air, but is happy to drop deep, happy to press. And I think that's what Ten Hag would have liked. But the truth is, bringing in Weghorst was one of the few options that we had, given that we more or less can't pay a transfer fee. So I don't think he's perfect. To be honest with you, I think he's more or less an average Premier League striker. But given what Ten Hag wanted, I think he's the best that we could have brought in.
Yeah, I was not in hugely favour of the signing, and you only had to look at what other clubs have been doing in the January window. Mudryk going to Chelsea, João Felix going to Chelsea, Cody Gakpo, United missed out on him going to Liverpool. These were signings that elicited a lot more excitement than Weghorst should have done. But for some reason, United fans were really excited about Weghorst because it was a striker signing in a position, obviously, that we've spoken about on the podcast, United so needed. So I suppose anything that he does exceeds a lot of people's expectations. And 1 goal in 3, I think his first 2 games against Crystal Palace and Arsenal, he didn't really have a chance to score, to speak of.
No.
And the goal he scored against Nottingham Forest was a goal that you really want him to score, and possibly that Anthony Martial or somebody who's not like that wouldn't score.
Yeah, it was a classic striker's goal. You could see as soon as the ball was hit, I think by Bruno off the top of my head. Oh, it was Antony. You could see that Weghorst was moving for the follow-up as soon as the ball was hit. If you actually watch the goal, he's already in motion for that. As Antony's basically winding up for the shot, he's coming in for the rebound. And just to add on to what we spoke about Martial before, I think that's one thing that's missing from his game. He's never quite had that killer instinct in terms of movement. When you watch someone like Haaland, who's probably the best example of that, he's constantly just trying to get those spaces and make those runs and preempt where a ball's about to go to get those easy shots that when you see the clips, you think, oh, that was an easy goal. But there's a skill to being always in the right position. And I don't think Martial has ever had that, if I'm fair.
Yeah, he's played a lot of football out on the left wing, Martial, and he'd always look comfortable, as so many United players do, cutting in off that left wing and sort of bending a shot in from there rather than operating within the width of the posts and the 6-yard box. Weghorst, is he now the first choice for the rest of the season, or does Ten Hag go back to Martial if and when fully fit? It seems like Weghorst is sort of the man in possession for the time being, and you wouldn't be surprised if he started the majority of games if both players are fit.
Yeah, it's tricky.
They do different jobs. Maybe there's different games for different players.
Yeah, they fit different game situations, and I think Ten Hag seems to be fostering this attitude of you only play if once you've got you've got to fight for the shirt, and you will keep that shirt as long as you keep on playing. But there's always the door's always open to other players to be able to coming in. You can see it throughout the entire 11. With Wan-Bissaka and Dalot, for example. Once Wan-Bissaka started playing a bit and playing fairly well, he continued to play whilst Dalot was still on the bench. I think it'll be the same thing with Weghorst and Martial. If you're playing well, you will probably start. And if your level drops, that'll be the point in which the other player comes in, and it's up to them to try and hold on to the shirt. And I think that's the right that's what you want at an elite side. No one should be yeah, I'm going to start week in, week out, no matter what I do. And I think that has an effect throughout the entire 11. And I'm hoping that'll have a good effect on Martial, because as we said at the very start of the podcast, his ceiling is a lot higher than Weghorst. And if we can actually push that up and he actually has to fight for it and it, I don't know, kick something off, then we'll get a lot more out of Martial than we're currently getting.
Yeah, that competition has not been something Martial has responded well to at United. Sadly, we talked in the past about the arrival of people like Lukaku, Ronaldo, Cavani, Ibrahimovic. Initially, it was the first one who did it, and Martial sort of didn't raise his game when those players came in the way that you want a player to. A player like Luke Shaw has done at United when Tellez and now Malacia have come in. Shaw's raised his game in response to that. So it remains to be seen. Hopefully, from a United point of view, that does happen. And who knows, that rivalry, the competition between Weghorst and Martial, it might change what United do in the summer. We've spoken about summer transfer targets, but I think Weghorst has even come out and said he wants to stay beyond the summer. Whether either or both of them stay beyond the summer, to me, is massively in doubt.
Well, I was going to say the Martial situation is a bit of a catch-22 in that regard, then, isn't it? Because he doesn't seem to play well when there's someone else around who can compete with him, but then isn't fit long enough to be relied upon on his own. So how do United win with that? I don't see how they do.
No, it's a lose-lose situation. Yeah. Where they might win, Alex, and we'll move on to the right wing. I think this is a position that United have struggled in for pretty much a decade. They bar Mason Greenwood's run on the right wing when he was really coming through, and we obviously know what's happened with him since. Bar that year or so, United have struggled for an answer in that position, and obviously signed an 85 million player to try and solve it, or signed a 75 million player, and then a year after signed an 85 million player to solve it. Antony and Jadon Sancho, both for different reasons at the moment, have question marks over them. I think with Antony, it's slightly unfairly, but you and your numbers might tell me differently.
I don't think Antony's been terrible, and I don't think that the narrative should be that he has been terrible. He's been slightly below what I would have expected him to be. And I'm not basing that off the fee that was paid. I'm basing that off the player that was at Ajax. So I doubt Antony, well, maybe he'll say otherwise, but I doubt Antony would consider himself a 70, 80 million pound player. I don't think Ajax considered him that. And I don't really think United considered him that. So to put him on that benchmark and compare him to it is not really fair on him. If anything, that should be United who should be, admonished for that, not Antony.
Yeah.
His expected goals. So just a little reminder, expected goals is a metric that determines the quantity and quality of the shots you create for yourself or for a team. His expected goals at Ajax last season was 0.37. So in other words, you'd expect him to score a goal once every 3 full games. It's now 0.25 at United, which is a drop off, But to be fair, I would say is the kind of drop off you would expect. He's come from the Eredivisie, which is a league that is obviously not as good as the Premier League. It's also higher scoring than the Premier League. And we have a model that predicts what goal scoring should be if a player was to move from, in this case, the Eredivisie to the Premier League. And this sort of drop off around 32%, that's more or less in line. I'm not too concerned about that. It's his assists that have dropped off significantly. And I'm not sure if that speaks to a Antony problem or the players around him not quite getting what he does. So his assists, his expected assists, 0.23 at Ajax. So expected to assist a goal 1 every 4 games, more or less. It's now 0.07, which is expected to assist a goal every 15 games or something, which is a 70% decrease and puts him in, like, I think below the 10th percentile or something. That's significant, and that's where I would raise question marks as to what's going on there. And I suspect it's something to do with the way that he cuts in, because I know at Ajax he cut in, and then he would, like, his classic thing was cutting in and then playing across to the far post for Sebastian Haller. And I'm not sure if, because we've had Martial in the box for that movement, he's instead been shooting or trying to play little passes rather than crossing it in. And maybe we'll see those numbers improving once Weghorst starts playing week in, week out. But
You'd hope so. You'd hope so. I think I was going to bring up that point that if you don't get to the byline as a winger, and this is potentially a very antiquated viewpoint, but if you don't get to the byline and get yourself in a position to cut across his back, eat that simple Man City goal and the Guardiola, basically, where you're getting to the byline, you're cutting it back for a striker who gets a finish from 5 or 6 yards. Antony doesn't get to the byline because he doesn't want to use his right foot, as far as I can see. And that is an issue in itself. United don't tend to score that type of goal, really. I know Rashford can go the other way on the left flank. He's got that in his game, and he's obviously getting the goal and assist numbers at the moment to show that. With Antony, I think he can go the other way. He can go on the right. He's obviously got that ability. I think it must be a confidence thing. I said this on the podcast before. I just think he doesn't quite back himself in the way he should, which is odd considering how Ten Hag seems to back him. Ten Hag has shown huge faith in him this season to pretty much start every game when he's fit, or every important game. So what's eating Antony, I suppose, is the issue.
So him getting to the byline and cutting it back, I agree that's a very good way of creating goals. Guardiola's City have shown that in spades. But as I said before, Antony quite often does cut in and play crosses that has worked fairly effectively in the Eredivisie and for Ajax. So I know he's not going around the right-hand side, but I guess the point I'm making is, even if he continues to come in on his left, his assist numbers should be better than they are. Full stop. Like, it's not about... Obviously, I think if he went around the right more often, that would be beneficial for loads of reasons. But what he's doing right now... in
the defender's mind, wouldn't it? That he can go either way, and maybe gives him a little bit more space to do what he wants to do. Yeah,
we've spoken about this at games, haven't we? If you're defending someone who you know always cuts in on one foot, it's so much easier to defend. If you've got someone who is willing to go around the right, and I think he should do this. He doesn't even have to do it that much, just to create a bit of doubt and still continue to cut in most of the time. He should get more luck with it. But yeah, there's something's not quite right with him creating, and I'm not 100% sure what it is. My guess is that he hasn't got anyone to cross the ball into like he had at Ajax. So, in 2 or 3 months, those numbers could be a lot better with Weghorst up front instead of Martial.
I think you're right in that the players around Antony are still getting used to how he plays, because he is an absolute box of tricks, and he sometimes can take a touch or two more than you expect him to take, and players have made a run a little bit too soon, or they've darted into a position where they think they're going to get the pass and they don't quite get it. I noticed it with his interplay with Bruno Fernandes against Forest, actually, in that game. And I think Gary Neville has said that Riyad Mahrez is maybe a good example for Antony to follow, in that he is a very, very skillful left-footed right winger who preferred to cut in, liked to do a lot of step overs, but now has a lot of variety in his game where he can play the ball sooner than you expect. He can keep the ball for a bit longer than you expect. And his teammates, obviously, City is the gold standard. We keep talking about them for attacking patterns of play. They're just all in sync with each other, aren't they? Have been for years. And we're asking Ten Hag and Antony within a few months of arriving at United to replicate that. So it's high ideals.
Yeah, I don't think we're saying you should be as good as Riyad Mahrez straight off the bat.
It would be nice.
It would be lovely. But those cutbacks that we spoke about before, Guardiola is obsessed with creating those situations where you get to the byline within the penalty area and you cut it back. And it's very obvious why. Because when you're in that area and you're playing it backwards, it's so difficult for a goalkeeper to come out and cut that out. So when we were building our models for cross handling, goalkeepers very rarely come for low crosses that are like out swinging. So they got an angle away from the goal. Goalkeepers almost never do it. And it's quite obvious why. And and on top of that, if it does go to a striker, it's a hell of a lot easier to score a ball that's along the ground than a header. So there's a lot of benefits to cutbacks over crosses. And Mahrez has clearly been taught that by Guardiola. And if Antony were to add that to his game as well, I think he'd go up to another level.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with his ability. Absolutely nothing wrong with his ability as far as I can see. His control and his touch, absolutely sensational as far as
he's only 21. You forget when you sign these players for big fees that he's still really a kid. If he could be coming out of the academy at this sort of age. So you've got to take that with a little bit of perspective and appreciate that he's got a long way to improve. And the Antony at 25 years old will not be the Antony at 21 years old. So I'm happy he's at United.
Yeah. Jadon Sancho is the next player I was going to talk about. A similar age to Antony. They're both 22, actually, Antony and Sancho.
Okay.
And Sancho is a player who arrived as the answer to the right wing problem, but is a right winger in a very different way to Antony. Obviously, as a right-footed player, some still argue that left wing is his best position. Sancho, I don't know what you see as his best position, but before we talk about that, we obviously need to say that he's not been in the first team picture since October the 22nd. Sancho, he's been training on his own. He's been put on a program by Ten Hag to slim down, I think, and to basically to give him time to reset himself as a footballer. Not, in my opinion, not that I think that he's been a disaster so far. I really don't think he has. He's just not been quite the player that United fans thought they were getting from Borussia Dortmund, because he was just setting the Bundesliga alight for 3 or 4 years when he was there. It's just that time in his career where things haven't quite run as smoothly as they were doing.
Yeah. When we signed Jadon Sancho, I genuinely thought that was the best possible signing you could make for what we wanted. In his position, at his age, there were very few players that were doing what he was doing at Dortmund. Whether he was a right winger or a left winger, that's more up for debate, because it seems odd to me that United signed him as a right winger when he played on the right, but he'd also played on the left quite a lot. And I had a look at his sort of outputs when he was at Dortmund. And so on the left, he's more of a goal scorer. His expected goals are higher. And on the right, he's more of a creator. And if you take them in combination, he is better on the left than he is on the right in terms of direct goal contributions. So
I think for United, he's been better on the left as well, even to a lesser extent, I suppose. Yeah.
So I still think there's a player there that can become one of the best in the world in his position. I hope is at United. So using our Sabr score, which looks at players' data, sees the effect it has on winning games and gives them a score, he's actually, from the data from the last year, the best player that we have, according to the Sabr score, which I know is going to raise a lot of eyebrows, but hear me out. Number 2 is Bruno Fernandes, and number 3 is Casemiro. So it's clearly doing something right. Something's on the right track. But you're probably thinking, but Jadon Sancho, his assist numbers haven't been that great. His goal scoring hasn't been that great. What Jadon Sancho does is he does a lot of the things that tend to lead to shots in good locations and passes into good locations. He is fantastic at progressing the ball forward. I think he's the best player we have. I think he's in the 85th percentile for progressive runs. So that's moving the ball 20 or 30 yards up the pitch with the ball at his feet. He never gives the ball away. He's in the 93rd percentile for dispossessions. And his pass completion, despite getting in the penalty area more than almost all of our wingers, I think, at United, he's fantastic getting the ball into the box. He still completes it 83% of the time, his passes, which puts him in the 90th percentile. So you've got someone who is brilliant at progressing the ball forward, brilliant at progressing it into the penalty area, very rarely gets dispossessed, and almost always keeps the ball. Those usually are predictive of being a very good winger who creates and scores goals. It's, for whatever reason, at that final hurdle, it hasn't worked out for Sancho. But I think keep with him, let him go through this difficult period that he's going through, and United could have a serious player, like a serious player.
Yeah, I've thought that, and nothing will shake me from that belief that he will become a serious player. And I think it will happen at United, because I just think that Ten Hag is backing him. And people might question me saying that, but I think even the very process of sending him away to train, giving him time, that is Ten Hag backing him. That's saying, we're not going to sell you. You're not out of the plans. You're very much in the plans, but just for the future. And you're still 22 years old. Jadon Sancho could have another decade at the top in his career or longer. So it's just whether he comes back now and he has a place in this side. Basically, Marcus Rashford is playing on the left wing. You cannot argue with that at all at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this. Where does he fit?
Yeah, for me, it comes down a straight shootout between Sancho and Antony, and that'll probably be good for both players. It might not be good for United's reputation in the transfer market to have two players they've paid such a high fee for, one of them always being on the bench. But I think it might be another horses for courses situation where you say Sancho gets more assists when he's on the right, and Antony's assist numbers have not been particularly good on the right, but Antony's such a goal threat cutting in. So what do you want? Is Sancho going to be the man getting to the byline and putting a cross in for Weghorst for the rest of the season? Possibly. Is Antony going to score the kind of goals that he's been scoring from 20, 30 yards? It looks like he can score them more regularly than most from that kind of range, given some of the strikes that he's managed. So it's not a bad situation to have, is it, those two competing?
Yeah, it's just whether it fits into what Ten Hag wants. He seems very keen on having inverted wingers. So you think like Ziyech at Ajax would cut in from the right on his left foot. Antony did the same thing. Rashford's doing the opposite on the left. It seems to be quite a clear pattern in terms of what he wants. And I wonder, will Sancho get a chance on the right? Because you look at like Pellistri, who we've, spoken about at games. I think the reason Pellistri hasn't played that much is because he's a right footer who likes to play on the right wing. And that would be the same thing with Jadon Sancho.
Yeah,
so
Garnacho seems to play on the left when he comes on. He seems to be the deputy.
He hasn't played a single game
Rashford
on the right, has he? He's always on the left.
But he seems to be better at it because he's got that cutting in, and then he's got the odd touch down the byline. That goal he scored against Fulham, running in the channel, latching onto a pass. He seems to be perfect for it, and he accepts. He's an 18-year-old who accepts being second fiddle to Rashford at the moment. That works as a dynamic on the left.
Yeah.
Where does it leave Sancho?
Yeah, exactly. I have no problem personally with having Sancho on the right. I think it gives us something else. My only question marks are whether Ten Hag actually wants that. And if Ten Hag doesn't want that, then I'm thinking, how on earth do you get Jadon Sancho on the pitch? Because Rashford right now cannot be dropped, should not be dropped. He's playing he has been world class like the past month. It is bizarre the improvement that he's made. I'm not sure if it's mental or physical. I know he had an injury last season, but the level that Rashford has raised his game is phenomenal. And there's very few players in the world that I want to replace Rashford with right now. As much as I love Sancho, he ain't getting on that. He ain't coming on if Rashford's playing like this. So, yeah, that is my concern. I don't know where he fits.
That's why we haven't really spoken about Rashford on this podcast, because I'm just not concerned about him at the moment. He's the one in that front line at the moment that you can hang your hat on. Weghorst or Martial down the middle, question marks over both. And now we're talking about Antony or Sancho, both in regards to that right wing where there are question marks. So, and also, if United aren't going to play Sancho on the right, does Ten Hag want an alternative inverted left-footed player to compete with Antony? Is that something he looks at going forward?
Well, I've got a name on my list that
couldn't be a pod with you without having a transfer.
Well, it's quite an obvious name because he's already on United's books. Amad Diallo is left-footed.
Very good shout.
And can play on the right-hand side. Can also play as a 10. And at Sunderland is looking like a player who should be playing in the Premier League already. And I think just turned 20. A lot of fans and pundits wrote off Amad Diallo, forgot about him. But how he's been at Sunderland, so I think his Sabr score is 78, which is roughly like average Premier League level. At 20 years old, can play on the right, wouldn't be a guaranteed starter. So maybe next season you bring him in as sort of the deputy on the right-hand side who can come in for Antony. That could be quite interesting because I think Amad Diallo is a real player.
Yeah, I remember asking you about him when United signed him, which seems like a long old time ago now, and it was 2 years ago when he came from Atalanta, having barely had a kick at first team level. Obviously, he was very young at that point, but United have paid a really interesting fee for him, where I think there was about the same amount in add-ons as they paid up front. I think it was roughly 20 million, and then potential 20 million in add-ons as well, which is not an insignificant fee for a player who had basically played a couple of first team games from the bench, torn it up in the UEFA Youth League, I think, that season, and in all youth teams at Atalanta. But now 7 goals in the Championship this season. I think he recently won Championship Player of the Month. He's inspiring Sunderland to a really good spell of form at the moment. It's an interesting one because if you can cut it in the Championship as a player like him, with his build quite slight, he might get kicked around quite a bit in the Championship. That's not a bad schooling for me to then come in and make a case at United.
No, his stats for the Primavera, so like the youth leagues in Italy, were phenomenal. Like across the board, it was like 99th percentile, goals, assists, dribbles, passing. He looked phenomenal. I think I said this to one of our friends that he looked like, it was almost like Messi, like the Messi of the Primavera. He looked like. Now, I'm not going to say he's not going to be as good as Messi, unfortunately. But the point stood that he looked absolutely phenomenal at that level. And you're right, the fact that he's gone to the Championship, and I think it was a perfect move for him because he is quite slight. He probably isn't used to getting kicked about. To go into the Championship and to look like
one of the better players there.
To look like one of the better players in the league. And like I said, on our stats, if you're adjusting his Championship stats to a Premier League standard, he's looking like someone who should be playing in the Premier League now. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
It's turned into the Wearside Messi. Yeah, if we can keep using that term to describe anyone and anyone. The final player I want. It's I think there's a Wikipedia page somewhere about players who've been dubbed the new Diego Maradona, and it's about 15 or 20 Argentinian number 10s since Maradona who've had that title. Just one more player for me to talk about on our list today, and in terms of United's forwards, and he's an interesting one, Anthony Elanga. I now don't know where Elanga's best position is, and I also don't know whether he will end up being good enough for Manchester United. It feels like it's been a really strange season for him after a proper breakout half year, especially under Rangnick last season, it seemed like Alanga had a real chance. But for whatever reason, Ten Hag hasn't particularly fancied him. And when we have seen Alanga, he's not looked like that player we saw last season.
No, I don't see where Alanga fits. I know he's played as a striker in the last few games or when he's come on.
Yeah.
I don't see anything in Alanga's game that suggests he is a striker. I think it's more of a case of Ten Hag shoehorning him into the team because he's not getting on the left because he's right-footed, isn't he? So he's not going to get on the left wing with Garnacho and Rashford there. I don't think Ten Hag wants to put him on the right because he's right-footed, which is what we spoke about before. And then the only space you can really fit him in is up front. But I don't see anything in his game that suggests he is a striker. And I don't think he is. I think the truth is he's a winger who probably isn't quite good enough for United. That being said, and I'm sure you're going to talk about it, Dortmund are reportedly interested in taking him on loan, which shows they clearly rate him higher than I do, because I don't think he's quite that level. And I think United should bite their hand off to give him that loan because he doesn't fit in the current team. And if he gets decent game time in the Bundesliga, he'll come back a more improved player, a more confident player, and probably a player that you can sell on for a decent bit of money in the summer. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I would take that all day long.
Yeah, well, speaking a few days before the January deadline, so United and Alanga need to get their skates on if they are going to sort out a loan for him. I agree it would be definitely the best thing for his development at this point.
I think he's keen as well.
Yeah, and he will be, given the minutes or lack of minutes that he's had this season. I thought it was amusing that the two loan clubs that he was linked with were Borussia Dortmund and Everton. Two very different situations. And I think if you were Antony Alanga, there'd only be one place you'd want to go at the moment out of those two. So we'll see. Yeah,
Dortmund have shown now for a while that they are very good at taking promising players and taking up to that next level. I mean, Jadon Sancho is an obvious example. If I was Alanga, I would relish that opportunity.
Yeah,
and
if he's
Everton,
not talking
I would
to Sancho,
not relish.
he needs to be talking to Sancho at the training ground, saying, is this the place for me? It remains to be seen whether that happens by the time we put out this podcast. As is usual for us, another club will have probably come in and loaned out Antony Alanga. We always seem to be the kiss of death for players and their next move. Matheus Cunha. Who else have we had? Gakpo, Matheus Cunha with the two of our first striker podcast that then went elsewhere.
Yeah, but if they're coming up on other clubs' lists, we must be doing something right.
Maybe they're just watching this and changing their transfer shortlist.
Maybe I'll just get a list of terrible players and we'll just talk about their virtues. Yeah.
We'll see what happens. It's going to be an interesting few days before the January transfer deadline, that's for sure. An interesting rest of the season for those United forwards that we've mentioned. Alex, thanks very much for coming back on. It's been a pleasure to have your insight and input once more.
Yeah, thanks for having me once again.
Yeah, and we'll be back for another one of these stats specials with Alex Wylie very, very soon for you. Please do follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and leave a like and a subscribe on this podcast as well if you can. We'll be back again very soon. Thanks for listening.